Good morning and blessed Easter to you and to yours. It's a wonderful, inspiring story that we have given for us today. The story that's found in John chapter 20, the story of Mary Magdalene's encounter with an empty tomb and a strangely familiar gardener. It's the high and glorious moment of grandeur of Christianity, Easter Day. And the parts that are most beloved in this narrative change as we get older and as life changes for us and our circumstances evolve, and we're invited to enter the story at a different place and from our own perspectives. It's wonderful how the story lives and changes along with us. It's the poignancy of the phrase, "while it was still dark," that strikes me as so important this year, that speaks to me more than any other phrase. I admire the courage that it takes for Mary to return to this garden, to this place where so much violence has happened, where she saw her beloved's broken body placed into a tomb. It took courage for her to return in the darkness alone. I think about all the times when I have been afraid to return to my own pain and to the darkness to be found there. I love that all four of the gospel accounts demonstrate that Mary and the other women are the first eyewitnesses who proclaimed the risen Christ, even though she herself has been vilified through the years, and instead of being called a disciple of Jesus and a leader of the early church, which she most certainly was, she is often mislabeled as a prostitute. Still, Mary is the one who shows up. She's the one who shows up in the dark. She's the symbol of all who dare to hope against hope, the tenacity of terror-filled people who keep showing up instead of giving up. The theologian and social justice activist Laurel Dykstra works for social justice in Vancouver in British Columbia. And some years ago, she wrote these words about the work where she finds her life's deepest meaning. In the women's group office where I work, she writes, there's a photocopy of a painting by Annie Bendes. Printed over the painting, but not obscuring the central image, is a list of tips by and for sex workers. The list reads this way: remember, an assault is an assault, whether you live in the White House or if you don't even have a house. Always check door handles before you get in to make sure that they work. Anything placed around your neck is dangerous. It can be used to strangle or drag you. The painting shows 5 women against a night city sky. The women wear long robes and headscarves with elaborate decorations. Rays of light are shining out from behind their heads. One woman is smoking a cigarette. Each woman's heart is visible outside her clothing, and all of the hearts are connected by vines. The writing in paint at the bottom reads, Mary Magdalene, the patron saint of sex workers. Nothing indicates which of the women is Mary. Perhaps they all are. We know that there is no historical evidence to confirm anything at all about the occupation of Mary Magdalene, and that her importance to Jesus through the years has been distorted, sexualized, and conflated with other characters by the patriarchal tradition. But the point of her presence in the Easter stories and their importance and their identity are all connected to ours. That connection is unmistakable. When you and I are facing the darkest nights of our souls, feeling at our lowest and most vulnerable, we remember that it is none other than the most notorious character of the Jesus narratives, Mary, who is the one who hears her name spoken, her value confirmed, and it is she who begins to see God in the gardener, where once there was only death. God in the garden, in the gardener, in the place of death, and it is she who runs to share the good news. The story says she mistakes him for the gardener, but I think it isn't a mistake. God is always in the gardeners and the gardens and in you and in me. It is the message of Easter, after all, that in many ways and everywhere you and I may encounter the beloved, shining and holy with earth under the fingernails and stains on the clothing. And when dealing with life and death and betrayal and heartache and new resurrection mornings, it is precisely there where we may expect God to be found. And it is true that you and I and the circumstances and the people we love may be irrevocably changed by the ordeals in which we are living and sometimes surviving. We may not recognize God in the garden or in us, and may not even recognize ourselves after the ordeals. Life and death, goodness knows, can do that to us, can't they? But Easter begins when the gardener speaks Mary's name, and when you and I hear our own names spoken, and when we speak the names of others, then we recognize God in the gardener, in the garden, and in us. And shown to us in the beautiful identities of all of God's children, all of us, and the creation itself. The truth of the Easter story, the truth that is real and palpable and as beautiful as the sunrise, is not a dismal clinical study that we have to affirm about resuscitation from the dead. This story is about resurrection, and that's different, and resurrection is happening all the time. There is yes written all over the Easter stories of ours. There is yes to rolling away stones that trap life inside or outside. There is yes to being recognized and called by your name and sent out. There is yes to life that begins anew in the spring, and yes to love that survives the worst of hate. Yes to starting over. Yes to beginning anew in the middle of wondering and doubting and daring. There is yes in this story. And in all the Easter stories of our faith, yes, the disciples are undeniably changed by what they have experienced. Yes, life and death does that to you, does that to me all the time. And it is what we choose to believe about our little and big life and death that will guide what we see, and not the other way around. And that's important for us to know. We're invited by the Easter story to know in our hearts and in our souls and in our bodies, and to experience that presence, the beloved one who is able to turn estrangement into reunion, dead ends into mountain trails, take closed tomb doors, massive walls, locks, chains, spears, guns, and crosses, and open them all up, climb over the pile, melt it down, rework it, and transform it until you and I are becoming yes. Yes to life and love and compassion and hope, for yes is stronger. Love stronger than gravestones. Death is not the final answer, not the end of the story. Death has only one line in life's drama, and then God keeps on speaking. God is still speaking. In this story, the gardener God speaks Mary's name. And when she hears her name, she realizes that she is yet alive. She remembers who she is, and she sees herself mirrored in the loving eyes of a friend, and that is our gift. That is what we may do for one another. That is the goal of following the Christ today, that we may see ourselves and that we may hold up the mirror of another's beloved identity and belonging to God. To know that we are not dead, that we are risen, and that Spirit is running around in the garden and going on ahead of us and living in all and living in us. May that be so for you this blessed Easter day. May you know God's love in and around you. Amen.